Commander Zektar of the Valerian Empire stared at the holographic display showing the edge of what the galaxy called the Silent Zone. For 300 cycles, no ship that entered this region of space had ever returned. Not one. The humans had claimed this territory after their sudden appearance on the galactic stage 50 years ago, and since then, it had become a forbidden zone that even the most powerful empires avoided. The Valorians were different. They were conquerors, proud warriors who had never met a species they couldn't defeat. Their ships were the fastest, their weapons the most deadly, and their soldiers the most feared across 100 star systems. When the Galactic Council had tried to negotiate with the humans for passage rights through their territory, the humans had simply responded with coordinates and a message: "You're welcome to try." Zektar's flagship, the Devourer, was accompanied by a full battle fleet of 200 ships. Each vessel carried enough firepower to glass an entire planet, and together they represented the largest military force the Valorians had ever assembled. The Emperor himself had given Zektar this mission: enter human space, discover their secrets, and claim their territory for the Empire. The fleet approached the boundary marked by ancient human warning buoys. These simple metal structures had been floating in space for decades, broadcasting the same message in every known galactic language. Warning: you are entering human territory. Turn back now. This is your only warning. Admiral Kresh, Zektar's second-in-command, approached the command platform. Her scarred face showed the same mixture of excitement and concern that Zektar felt. "Commander, our scouts report no immediate threats. The region appears empty of any significant military presence." Zektar nodded, but something about the situation bothered him. Where were the human ships? Where were their defenses? Every other species in the galaxy protected their borders with massive fleets and weapon platforms. The humans seemed to rely on nothing but warnings and reputation. "Perhaps they're not as powerful as we thought," suggested Captain Vorth from the weapons station. "Maybe the missing ships were destroyed by natural phenomena. Space is full of dangers." But Zektar had studied every report about human encounters. The few times humans had appeared outside their territory, they had displayed technology that seemed impossible. Ships that moved faster than anything in the known galaxy. Weapons that could cut through any armor. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know things about their enemies before battles even began. The fleet crossed the boundary. Immediately, every sensor on every ship began detecting strange readings. The space around them seemed normal, but there was an underlying energy signature that none of their scientists could identify. It was as if the very fabric of space had been altered in some fundamental way. "Commander," called the sensor operator, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm getting readings that don't make sense. There are gravity wells where there should be empty space. Energy patterns that follow no known physics. And, sir, I'm detecting what might be structures, but they're hidden somehow." Zektar felt his first real moment of doubt. The Valorians were masters of stealth technology, but this was beyond anything they had ever encountered. It was as if the humans had found ways to hide things from reality itself. The fleet moved deeper into human territory, following the course that previous expeditions had taken. According to the few long-range sensors that had tracked the missing fleets, most had disappeared near a system that the humans called Sol. Intelligence suggested this was their homeworld system, though no one had ever confirmed it. Days passed as they traveled through the eerily quiet region. The strange energy readings grew stronger, and their equipment began experiencing minor malfunctions. Nothing serious enough to stop them, but enough to make everyone nervous. Several crew members reported strange dreams, and a few claimed to see things moving in the empty space around them. "It's psychological warfare," Kresh assured Zektar during one of their planning sessions. "They're trying to break our morale before we even encounter them. Classic human tactics, according to the intelligence reports." But Zektar wasn't convinced. He had read those same reports, and what worried him most was how little solid information they contained. Humans had appeared suddenly, 50 years ago, claiming a vast territory and demonstrating impossible technology. They had then vanished into their space, only emerging occasionally for trade or diplomatic contact. No one knew where they had come from or how they had developed such advanced capabilities so quickly. On the 10th day of their journey, they finally encountered something. A single human ship appeared on their sensors, small and apparently unarmed. It was heading directly toward their fleet, making no attempt to hide or escape. Red alert, Zektar commanded. All ships, battle formation. Prepare for engagement. The human ship came to a stop just outside their weapons range. A communication signal arrived immediately, and the image of a human appeared on their main screen. The being looked unremarkable by galactic standards, similar to several other species, but with distinctive features that marked them as human. "I am Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force," the human said, her voice calm and pleasant. "You have entered human territory despite our warnings. I'm here to offer you one final chance to turn back." Zektar stood tall, his intimidating presence filling the command bridge. "I am Commander Zektar of the Valerian Empire. We claim this territory for our emperor. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." Captain Chen smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than any threat. "Commander, you have a fine fleet. 200 ships, approximately 50,000 crew members, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Very impressive." The fact that she knew their exact fleet composition sent a chill through the bridge. How could she have counted their ships so quickly and accurately? However, Chen continued, "You are about to discover why no one returns from human space. This isn't because we destroy intruders, Commander. It's because once you see what we're really capable of, you won't want to leave." Zektar signaled for the communication to be cut, but nothing happened. His crew frantically worked their controls, but the human's image remained on their screens. "Don't worry about the technical difficulties," Chen said, still smiling. "Your systems are fine. We're just making sure you hear what we have to say. In approximately 1 hour, you'll reach the edge of our inner system. You'll discover why humans have never been conquered, why we've never lost a battle, and why every species that has encountered us has either become our ally or has chosen to never speak of what they saw." The transmission finally ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Zektar looked around at his crew, seeing his own confusion reflected in their faces. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, "that ship, it's gone. It just vanished from our screens." Zektar stared at the empty space where the human vessel had been. No ship could disappear that quickly, not without leaving some trace. But their sensors showed nothing, as if the ship had never existed at all. "Continue course," he ordered, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "All ships, maximum alert. Whatever we're about to face, we'll meet it as Valorians." But deep in his mind, a growing dread told him that they were flying towards something that would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. The hour passed faster than Zektar would have liked. As their fleet approached the coordinates that marked the boundary of the human inner system, reality itself seemed to shift around them. The strange energy readings that had been growing stronger suddenly spiked beyond anything their instruments could measure. "Commander," the science officer reported, his voice filled with awe and terror, "we're detecting massive structures ahead. But, sir, they're not showing up on visual sensors. It's like they exist and don't exist at the same time." Before Zektar could respond, the space in front of them began to shimmer. What had appeared to be empty void suddenly revealed itself to be something impossible. Structures materialized out of nowhere, vast beyond comprehension. Space stations the size of moons hung in perfect formation, connected by streams of energy that pulsed with power that made their fusion cores look like candles. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Moving between these massive installations were ships, thousands upon thousands of them. Each one was easily 10 times the size of Zektar's flagship, and they moved with a grace and speed that defied physics. Most disturbing of all, many of the designs were clearly not human. "Those are Krillian dreadnoughts," Admiral Kresh whispered, staring at the display. "And Zephyrian battlecruisers. Even some of our own ships. But that's impossible. The Krillians were destroyed 2 centuries ago." Zektar's blood turned cold as he recognized more and more ship designs. Species that had vanished from the galaxy over the past 300 years. Civilizations that had supposedly been wiped out by natural disasters, plagues, or wars. They were all here in human space, their ships flying alongside human vessels as if they were allies. A new communication signal arrived, this time from one of the massive space stations. The face that appeared on their screen was humanoid, but not human. It belonged to a Krillian, a species that Zektar had studied in history classes as an example of a failed civilization. "Greetings, Valerian fleet," the Krillian said, speaking perfect Valerian. "I am Admiral THYSS Carr, formerly of the Krillian Stellar Empire, currently of the Human Defense Coalition. Welcome to Sol System, the heart of human space." Zektar found his voice, though it came out weaker than he intended. The Krillians were destroyed. Their homeworld was consumed by their dying star. Admiral THYSS Carr's expression was patient, almost sympathetic. "That's what we allowed the galaxy to believe. The truth is, when our star began to die, we thought our civilization was doomed. We sent out desperate calls for help, but no one answered. Except the humans." The display changed, showing images that made Zektar's crew gasp in amazement. Massive human ships, larger than anything they were seeing now, surrounded a dying star. But instead of fleeing from it, they were doing something to it. Energy beams of impossible intensity were somehow stabilizing the stellar collapse, reversing the process that should have destroyed an entire solar system. "They saved our star," THYSS Carr continued. "They saved our entire species. And they asked for nothing in return except that we let the galaxy believe we had perished. You see, humans have a very different philosophy about warfare than the rest of the galaxy." Another voice joined the transmission, this time definitely human. Captain Chun reappeared, but now she was standing on what appeared to be the bridge of one of the massive stations. "Commander Zektar, what you're seeing is the truth that we've kept hidden for 3 centuries. Humans don't conquer. We save." Zektar's mind reeled as more images filled their screens. The Zephyrians, who had supposedly died in a galactic plague, being transported to safety on human medical ships that could cure diseases thought incurable. The Nethrani, who had vanished during a civil war, being relocated to new worlds where they could live in peace. Species after species that the galaxy had written off as lost, all living safely under human protection. "This is impossible," Admiral Kresh said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The energy requirements alone, the technology needed, it's beyond anything we thought possible." Captain Shin smiled again, and this time Zektar understood why it was so unsettling. It wasn't threatening. It was sad. "Admiral, your species measures advancement by your ability to destroy. You build bigger weapons, faster ships, stronger armor. You think power comes from the ability to take life." The display shifted again, showing human ships engaged in activities that left the Valerian fleet speechless. Planets being moved through space as easily as shuttlecraft. Stars being ignited to provide warmth to frozen worlds. Entire solar systems being constructed from raw materials, complete with carefully designed ecosystems. "We measure advancement by our ability to preserve life," Chen continued. "Every species in this system came to us on the brink of extinction. Some were destroyed by natural disasters, others by wars, still others by plagues or environmental collapse. We saved them all, and, in return, they chose to remain hidden from a galaxy that had failed them." Zektar stared at the impossible vista before him. The space stations weren't just massive, they were entire worlds, each one housing billions of beings from dozens of species. The energy streams connecting them weren't weapons. They were transportation systems that allowed instant travel across distances that should have taken months to cross. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why hide this? Why let the galaxy think these species were dead?" Another voice answered, this time belonging to a species Zektar didn't recognize. "Because the galaxy is not ready for what we've learned," the being said. "We tried to share our knowledge once, long ago. We offered our help openly. Do you know what happened?" The display showed scenes of war, destruction on a scale that made Zektar's own battles seem like minor skirmishes. Entire star systems burning as different factions fought over human technology. Billions dead in conflicts sparked by greed and fear. They called it the Resource Wars, the unknown being continued. 30 years of galactic warfare, all because various empires wanted to control human technology instead of learning from it. That's when we decided that some truths are too dangerous for a warlike galaxy. Captain Chun took over again. "So we developed a new strategy. Instead of trying to change the galaxy, we would simply remove ourselves from it. When species face extinction, we quietly save them and bring them here. The galaxy thinks they're dead, and we let them believe it. Meanwhile, these species get a second chance at life, free from the conflicts and hatreds that nearly destroyed them. Admiral Kresh stepped forward. And what about those who discover your secret? What happens to ships that enter your territory? That depends entirely on them, Chen replied. Some species, when they see what we've accomplished, choose to join us. They fake their own destruction and come here to live in peace. Others choose to return to the galaxy, but they never speak of what they've seen. They understand that revealing our secret would doom millions of innocent beings to continue living in a galaxy at war. And if they try to exploit this knowledge? Zektar asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Chen's expression grew serious for the first time. Then, they discover why humans have never been successfully attacked. Commander, what you see here isn't our military force. This is our civilian population. Our actual defensive capabilities are considerably more extensive. As if summoned by her words, space around the Valerian fleet began to change again. Ships materialized that dwarfed even the massive stations they had been admiring. These vessels were clearly military, and their very presence seemed to bend reality around them. Energy readings spiked to levels that should have been impossible, and Zektar realized that any one of these ships could destroy his entire fleet without effort. But we don't want to fight you, Chen continued. We want to offer you a choice. The same choice we offer every species that finds us. The display now showed something that made Zektar's heart skip. It was Valoria Prime, his homeworld. But it wasn't the thriving military planet he remembered. The images showed environmental devastation, overcrowded cities, resources depleted by centuries of warfare. His own people were slowly destroying their world in their endless quest for military supremacy. Your species is dying, Commander, Chen said gently. Not from external threats, but from your own success as warriors. Your homeworld can't sustain your population much longer. Your resources are nearly exhausted. Within 2 generations, Valoria will be uninhabitable. Zektar wanted to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The environmental reports his government had classified as military secrets were somehow displayed on his screen, showing the truth his own people were hiding from themselves. We can help, Chen offered. We can save your species, just as we've saved all the others. But it would mean letting the galaxy believe that the Valorians had finally met their match. It would mean abandoning the path of conquest and choosing the path of preservation. The bridge fell silent as the magnitude of the choice became clear. Everything Zektar had believed about strength, about victory, about the nature of civilization itself, was being challenged by what he saw around him. How long do we have to decide? He asked finally. As long as you need, Chen replied. But, Commander, I should tell you something else. You're not the first Valerian fleet to find us. Over the years, several of your scout ships have discovered our secret. Some chose to join us. Others chose to return home. And those who returned? What did they tell our government? Chen's smile returned, sad and knowing. That human space is empty and dangerous. That ships disappear because of natural phenomena. That there's nothing here worth conquering. They chose to protect both our secret and their own people by discouraging further expeditions. Zektar realized with growing amazement that some of his own military's intelligence reports had been deliberate misdirection, created by Valerian officers who had seen the truth and chosen to hide it. They had been protecting humanity by convincing their own empire that human space wasn't worth exploring. Take your time, Commander, Chen said. Explore our system. Talk to the species who chose to live here. Learn what we're really offering. Then, make your choice, not just for yourself, but for all Valorians. As the transmission ended, Zektar looked around his bridge at officers whose worldview had just been shattered as completely as his own. They had come here expecting to fight and conquer. Instead, they had discovered that everything they thought they knew about strength and survival was wrong. Over the following days, Zektar's fleet was given unprecedented access to human space. They were escorted by vessels from dozens of supposedly extinct species, each eager to share their story of salvation and rebirth. What Zektar discovered challenged everything he had ever believed about civilization, technology, and the nature of strength itself. The first stop was a massive habitat called New Krillia, where the survivors of the Krillian civilization had built a society that surpassed anything they had achieved in their original empire. Admiral HFY Carr personally guided Zektar through cities that floated in space, sustained by technology that converted pure energy into matter, creating food, air, and water from the quantum foam of space itself. When our star began dying, we thought it was the end, HFY Carr explained as they walked through gardens that bloomed in zero gravity, tended by children who had never known the fear of extinction. We were a warrior species, like yours. We believed in conquest, in taking what we needed from others. But when death came for us, all our weapons and victories meant nothing. They stood before a memorial wall that displayed the names of billions of Krillians who had died in the wars that had weakened their civilization before the stellar crisis. We had spent so much time fighting others that we never learned to preserve ourselves. The humans changed that. They didn't just save our bodies, they saved our souls. Zektar watched Krillian children playing with human children, their laughter echoing through the crystalline corridors. These beings showed none of the aggressive tendencies that had defined their species for millennia. They had found something better than conquest. The next destination was equally transformative. The Zephyrian medical stations were marvels of biotechnology, where diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries were not just cured but understood at a fundamental level. Dr. Vexera, the Zephyrian chief medical officer, showed Zektar laboratories where human and Zephyrian scientists worked together to solve problems that individual species had considered impossible. The plague that nearly destroyed us wasn't natural, Dr. Vexera revealed, her translucent skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that indicated deep emotion. It was a bioweapon, created by a rival empire that wanted our trade routes. We were dying, and no one would help us for fear of infection, except the humans. She led them to a chamber where the actual plague virus was contained and studied. They didn't just cure us. They traced the plague back to its source and discovered that it wasn't the first bioweapon that Empire had used. They had been committing genocide for decades, making it look like natural disasters. The humans stopped them. How? Admiral Kresh asked. Dr. Vexera's expression grew somber. They made the perpetrators' homeworld uninhabitable, but they evacuated the civilian population first. The guilty leadership found themselves ruling empty planets while their people were relocated to safe worlds under new identities. Justice without genocide. At each location, Zektar encountered similar stories. The Nethrani had been saved from a civil war that would have exterminated them. The humans had ended the conflict by relocating the warring factions to separate systems where they could build new societies without the hatred that had driven them to near extinction. The Voltax had been rescued from a cosmic disaster that would have destroyed their entire cluster of worlds, their civilization transported intact to a new region of space. But it was the human homeworld of Earth that truly shattered Zektar's understanding of what was possible. Earth was not one world, but thousands. The original planet floated serenely in the center of a sphere of artificial worlds, each one a perfect copy of Earth's original biosphere, but adapted for different species. Krillian Earths with higher radiation levels, Zephyrian Earths with the precise atmospheric composition their species required, even Valorian Earths with the gravitational conditions and climate that would make his own people feel at home. We call it the Garden of Worlds, Captain Chun explained as their shuttle approached the original Earth. Every species we save gets their own world, designed specifically for their needs. But they're all connected by the transport network, so isolation is a choice, not a necessity. The original Earth was unlike anything in Zektar's experience. Instead of the massive military installations and industrial complexes that dominated Valerian worlds, Earth was covered in cities that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. Technology was seamlessly integrated with nature, creating urban environments that enhanced rather than destroyed their surroundings. But what truly amazed Zektar was the diversity. Humans lived alongside members of dozens of species, but not in the tense, segregated manner of galactic trade stations. Here, children of different species played together, adults worked on joint projects, and families were often multi-species adoptions. How is this possible? Zektar asked as he watched a human child being taught to fly by a Krillian elder, their joy transcending species boundaries. How do you prevent conflict? How do you manage resources? Captain Chen led him to an observation deck that overlooked one of Earth's major cities. Commander, what if I told you that the secret isn't managing conflict, but making it unnecessary? What if the real breakthrough wasn't military technology, but understanding what beings actually need to be happy? She gestured toward the city below, where automated systems maintained themselves while the inhabitants focused on art, science, exploration, and relationships. When no one wants for basic needs, when everyone has meaningful work, when children grow up without fear, most conflicts simply don't arise. The few that do are usually solved through communication rather than violence. Zektar had studied enough galactic history to know this should be impossible. But resources are limited. Space is finite. How do you handle expansion, territory, the need for growth? Space isn't finite, Shin replied with amusement. Commander, we've been to other galaxies. We've mapped galactic clusters. We've found evidence of universe-spanning civilizations. The only thing that's truly limited is time, and even that might not be as fixed as we once thought. She led him to a viewing chamber where they could see beyond the Sol system to the incredible structures that surrounded it. What Zektar had taken for space stations were actually the beginning of a Dyson sphere, a structure that would eventually surround the entire star and capture all its energy. But even that wasn't the most impressive sight. In the distance, barely visible even with enhanced sensors, were other stars that had been moved into precise formations. Entire stellar systems had been rearranged to create optimal conditions for the civilizations living within them. The humans weren't just preserving life. They were engineering the galaxy itself to support it. This is why we stay hidden, Chen explained. Not because we're afraid of the galaxy, but because the galaxy isn't ready for this level of technology. Can you imagine what the current empires would do with the ability to move stars? They would use it as a weapon. They would threaten entire civilizations with stellar displacement. A new voice joined their conversation, which is exactly what happened the last time we tried to share openly. The speaker was clearly human, but ancient beyond anything Zektar had encountered. Her eyes held the weight of centuries, and when she moved, space itself seemed to ripple around her. Commander, this is Director Sarah Okafor, Chen said with obvious respect. She was one of the original architects of our isolation policy. Director Okafor nodded to Zektar. 300 years ago, we were younger and more idealistic. We thought that if we showed the galaxy what was possible, everyone would want to achieve it. We were wrong. She led them to a historical archive, where holographic displays showed events that had been erased from galactic records. We gave one empire the technology to cure genetic diseases. They used it to create super soldiers and attempt to conquer their neighbors. We shared our transportation technology with another species. They used it to relocate entire populations against their will, creating a slave labor force. The images were horrifying. Human technology being perverted into tools of oppression and destruction, causing suffering on a scale that made traditional warfare seem humane. That's when we realized that technology without wisdom is dangerous. We could give every species in the galaxy the power to reshape reality, but without the philosophical framework to use it responsibly, we would only be accelerating their destruction. Director Okafor turned to face Zektar directly. Your species isn't evil, Commander. Neither were any of the others who misused our gifts. You're simply not ready. You measure success by what you can destroy rather than what you can preserve. You see other species as competitors rather than potential partners. You believe that taking from others makes you stronger rather than making everyone weaker. Zektar felt a deep shame wash over him as he realized the truth in her words. Every great Valerian victory had been built on the suffering of others. Every expansion of their empire had come at the cost of some other species' freedom or resources. But readiness can be learned. Director Okafor continued, her expression softening. Every species here went through the same transition. The Krillians were as aggressive as you are now. The Zephyrians were completely isolationist, refusing to help anyone outside their own species. The Nethrani were so focused on their internal conflicts that they couldn't see the bigger picture. What changed them? Admiral Kresh asked. They chose to change, Chen answered. That's what we offer every species we encounter. Not forced conversion or conquest, but a choice. Stay in the galaxy and continue the cycle of conflict, or join us and learn a different way. And if we choose to stay? Zektar asked. Director Okafor's expression grew sad. Then, you go back to the galaxy with a warning about the dangers of human space. You discourage other expeditions. You help preserve our secret while your own species continues down its current path until it destroys itself or finds its own way to wisdom. Or you choose differently, Chen added. You acknowledge that the Valerian Empire as it currently exists cannot survive in the long term. You fake your destruction and bring your entire species here, where they can learn to build rather than destroy. As they stood in the archive, surrounded by the evidence of failed attempts to change the galaxy, Zektar finally understood the true magnitude of the choice he faced. This wasn't just about him or his fleet. It was about the future of every Valerian who would ever live. And tomorrow, he would have to decide which future that would be. The decision that would determine the fate of the Valerian Empire could not be made by one person, no matter how much authority they held. Zektar called for a fleet-wide assembly, using the humans' communication systems to connect every ship and every crew member in a conversation that would have been impossible with Valerian technology. The debate that followed was unlike anything in their military history. For the first time, ordinary soldiers spoke freely to their commanders about the reality of what they had seen. Fear, wonder, hope, and despair mixed together as hundreds of thousands of Valorians tried to process the choice before them. Captain Gorvek of the destroyer Bloodfang was among the first to speak. With respect, Commander, what we've seen here changes everything. I've spent my life believing that strength comes from superior firepower. But these humans move stars like we move shuttlecraft. If this is what's possible, what have we been fighting for? His words sparked a fierce response from Captain Thex of the battlecruiser Iron Will. We've been fighting for Valoria? For our empire, our people, our way of life. Are we supposed to abandon everything we are because these humans have impressive technology? But it was Admiral Kresh who asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Commander HFY Car, she addressed the Krillian officer who had joined their assembly. When your species made this choice, did you lose who you were? HFY Car's response was thoughtful and honest. We lost who we thought we were. The Krillian Empire was built on conquest, on proving our superiority through warfare. That identity died when we realized it was killing us. But we didn't lose who we truly were beneath the violence. We were explorers, scientists, artists, parents who wanted their children to have a future. That's who we became again. The conversation continued for hours, with crew members sharing their own experiences of the past days. They had seen former enemies working together on projects that benefited everyone. They had witnessed technology that could solve every resource problem the galaxy faced. Most powerfully, they had met children from dozens of species who grew up without fear, without hatred, without the assumption that other beings were threats to be conquered. Dr. Kess, the fleet's chief medical officer, spoke about the Zephyrian medical facilities. They offered to cure the genetic defects that have plagued our species for generations. Not in exchange for anything, not as a bargaining chip, but simply because they could help. When was the last time anyone in the galaxy offered aid without expecting something in return? Engineer Vorthak from the carrier Stormbringer described the technology he had been shown. Their power systems don't require fuel. They convert empty space into energy. Their manufacturing systems can create any material from raw atoms. They've solved every technical problem we've ever faced, and they want to teach us how. But not everyone was convinced. Major Grex, leader of the fleet's ground forces, voiced the concerns that many shared. This all sounds perfect, but what about honor? What about the glory of battle, the pride of victory? Are we supposed to become soft, to forget the warrior spirit that made us strong? It was a young ensign, barely old enough to serve, who answered him. Major, I've seen their warriors. The humans who protected the Nethrani during their civil war, the teams that stabilized dying stars, the explorers who venture into other galaxies. They fight battles that make our conflicts look small. They fight against extinction itself, against the heat death of the universe, against entropy and chaos. Isn't that a worthier enemy than other species who are just trying to survive like we are? The debate might have continued indefinitely, but Director Okafor intervened with information that changed everything. Commander Zektar, I think your people should know something that might influence your decision. The Valerian Empire is not as stable as your leadership believes. A new set of displays activated, showing intelligence that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. Detailed reports of resource depletion, environmental collapse, and growing unrest within the Valerian Empire. Worlds that were strip-mined to exhaustion, populations that were growing desperate as their quality of life declined, military units that were increasingly being used for internal suppression rather than external conquest. Your recent expansion has been driven by necessity, not strength, Director Okafor explained. Your empire needs the resources of conquered worlds to sustain itself. But each conquest requires more energy than the last, and the resources you gain are quickly depleted. You're trapped in a cycle that can only end in collapse. The data was overwhelming and undeniable. The Valerian Empire was dying, slowly but inevitably, strangled by its own success as a conquering power. How long do we have? Zektar asked, his voice hollow. At current rates of expansion and consumption, perhaps 50 years before critical systems begin to fail, Director Okafor replied. 100 years before the Empire becomes unsustainable. Your grandchildren will inherit a crumbling civilization that can no longer support its population. The weight of this revelation settled over the assembly like a physical force. Everything they had fought for, everything they had believed in, was ultimately doomed. But Captain Chin stepped forward with a different perspective. Commander, you're thinking of this as an ending. We see it as a beginning. Your species has incredible potential. You're naturally protective of your own people, you have strong organizational skills, and you're capable of incredible loyalty and sacrifice. These are valuable traits, but they've been channeled into destructive purposes by a system that doesn't understand their true potential. She gestured toward the displays showing Valerian capabilities. Your military engineering is superb. Your strategic thinking is among the best in the galaxy. Your social cohesion is remarkable. Imagine what you could accomplish if you directed these strengths toward preservation instead of conquest. Admiral Thys Carr added his own perspective. When the Krillians joined the human coalition, we brought our own strengths. Our research capabilities, our manufacturing techniques, our artistic traditions. We didn't lose our identity. We found a better expression of it. The same could be true for your people. The conversation took a new direction as crew members began to imagine what Valerian culture could become. Their military precision applied to rescue operations that could save entire civilizations. Their strategic minds focused on long-term projects that spanned centuries. Their warrior spirit directed against the true enemies of life itself. Commander Vex, the fleet's youngest captain, spoke for many when she said, I joined the military to protect Valoria and our people. If our current path leads to extinction, then staying on it isn't protecting anyone. It's just postponing our destruction while causing suffering to others. But the decision ultimately came down to more than logic or even survival. It was about what kind of beings they wanted to be and what kind of legacy they wanted to leave. Zektar stood before his entire fleet, feeling the weight of speaking for an entire species. I need to ask each of you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. If you could ensure that Valerian children 1,000 years from now would live in peace, prosperity, and safety, would you be willing to sacrifice the Valerian Empire as it currently exists? The vote that followed was not close. Overwhelmingly, the crews chose the future over the past, preservation over conquest, hope over pride. Then, it's decided, Zektar announced. We return to Valerian space as planned. But not to report our discoveries to the Emperor. Instead, we begin the process of transition. We start evacuating our worlds, beginning with the most vulnerable populations. We stage our own defeat, making it appear that the Valerian fleet met with disaster in human space. Admiral Kresh stepped forward. And those of us who returned to coordinate the evacuation? How do we explain our survival? Captain Chen answered. The same way it's been done before. You report that human space is dangerous, that most of the fleet was lost to spatial anomalies and hostile conditions. You discourage further expeditions while secretly organizing the evacuation of your people. Director Okafor added the final piece of the plan. We've done this before with other species. It takes time, sometimes decades, but eventually, the entire population can be relocated safely. The key is patience and careful planning. As the assembly dispersed, Zektar felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. They were ending an empire that had lasted for millennia, but they were beginning something unprecedented. The voluntary transformation of an entire civilization from a force of destruction into a force of preservation. The Valerian Empire would die, but the Valerian people would live. And, perhaps, in learning to preserve rather than conquer, they would finally become worthy of the strength they had always claimed to possess. The hardest part would be keeping the secret. But, as Zektar looked around at his crew, he saw the same determination that had once driven them to conquest now focused on the greatest mission of their species' history, saving themselves by learning to save others. Tomorrow, they would begin the journey home and start the most important deception in galactic history. The galaxy would believe that another empire had fallen to the mysterious dangers of human space, never knowing that it had actually found salvation there. 15 years had passed since the Valerian fleet's fateful encounter with the humans, and the galaxy's greatest deception was nearing completion. What appeared to be the gradual decline and eventual collapse of the Valerian Empire was actually the most carefully orchestrated evacuation in galactic history. Emperor Vakthar stood on the observation deck of his palace on Valoria Prime, watching the daily Exodus ships depart for what the galaxy believed were routine military exercises. In reality, these ships were carrying the last free Valorians to safety in human space, joining the billions who had already made the journey. The plan had required sacrifices that would have been unthinkable to the old Valerian Empire. Zektar, now bearing the title of Supreme Admiral, had staged his own death 3 years ago when rival empires began to suspect that the Valerian military was not as weakened as it appeared. His assassination by human infiltrators had been so convincing that the galaxy still celebrated it as proof that the mysterious humans could be defeated. Zektar now served as the Valerian Integration Coordinator in the Sol System, helping newly arrived Valorians adapt to their new lives while maintaining the careful flow of intelligence that kept the deception alive. Through encrypted communications that the humans made appear to be natural cosmic phenomena, he coordinated with the teams still operating in Valerian space. Admiral Kresh had taken on perhaps the most dangerous role, remaining behind as the apparent last military commander of a dying empire. Her job was to make the Valerian collapse appear authentic while ensuring that no other species attempted to claim their territory before the evacuation was complete. Admiral, her aide reported as she reviewed the day's departure schedules. The agricultural transport from Valoria, 7 reports successful departure. That completes the evacuation of the Outer Rim worlds. Kresh nodded, marking another system as successfully emptied on her private charts. From the outside, it appeared that these worlds had been abandoned due to resource depletion and economic collapse. In truth, their entire populations had been relocated to carefully prepared worlds in human space. The deception had required creating an elaborate fiction of internal strife and environmental catastrophe. Worlds that had been successfully evacuated were reported as lost to civil war or rendered uninhabitable by industrial accidents. Military units that had joined the Exodus were listed as destroyed in factional fighting or lost to mutiny. The galaxy watched the collapse of the Valerian Empire with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Other empires moved to claim abandoned Valerian territory, only to find worlds that appeared to be environmental disasters or trapped in endless civil conflicts. Human technology made these deceptions devastatingly convincing, creating the appearance of devastation where careful evacuation had taken place. But maintaining the illusion required constant vigilance and sacrifice. Commander Thale, one of the last senior officers still operating in Valerian space, faced a critical decision when the Draxan Empire sent a fleet to investigate what they suspected might be valuable salvage on the supposedly dead world of Valoria 3. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "Draxan scouts are approaching the outer system. They'll detect the evacuation ships if they get close enough." Thale made the choice that dozens of Valerian officers had made over the years. Prepare the final protocols. Make it look like a last desperate battle. All ships are to engage the Draxans, then stage catastrophic failures. Escape pods are to be launched toward the hidden human vessels waiting in the system's asteroid field. What followed appeared to be the last gasp of Valerian resistance. A brief, brutal engagement where the remaining Valerian forces fought with desperate courage before being overwhelmed. The Draxans reported back that they had finished off the last Valerian defenders, never knowing that the destroyed Valerian ships had actually transferred their crews to human vessels that remained invisible to Draxan sensors. In the Sol system, the integration of Valerian refugees continued to exceed everyone's expectations. The same organizational skills that had made them effective conquerors made them exceptional at coordinating massive humanitarian projects. Valerian engineering teams worked alongside humans to design and build new worlds optimized for species that had never coexisted before. Former Admiral HFY Carr, now serving as the liaison between human leadership and the various refugee species, marveled at how quickly the Valorians had adapted to their new role. Commander Zektar, your people have surprised everyone. We expected it to take decades for a warrior culture to transition to a preservation focus. Your species has done it in less than a generation. Zektar, standing in the command center that coordinated the activities of 17 different species across hundreds of worlds, allowed himself a moment of pride. Admiral, we were always protectors. We just needed to learn what was truly worth protecting. Around them, displays showed the incredible scope of what the human coalition had accomplished. Former Valerian military commanders now led rescue fleets that responded to distress calls from across the galaxy. Valerian strategic planning was being applied to projects that would take centuries to complete. The construction of generation ships capable of carrying entire ecosystems to distant galaxies. The development of technology that could revive dead planets. The creation of mobile worlds that could relocate endangered species before disasters struck. But perhaps the most significant change was visible in the children. Young Valorians who had been raised in the human coalition showed none of the aggressive territorialism that had defined their species. They played and learned alongside human, Krillian, Zephyrian, and Nethrani children, developing friendships and perspectives that would have been impossible under the old system. Dr. Kess, the former fleet medical officer who now ran one of the coalition's largest hospitals, watched a group of mixed-species children working together on a science project. You know what amazes me most? These children don't see differences between species as threats. They see them as advantages. Each species brings different strengths to solve problems. The final phase of the evacuation was the most dangerous. Emperor Vakthar himself would have to stage his own death and the fall of the imperial capital in a way that convinced the galaxy that the Valerian Empire had truly ended. The humans had developed a plan that would require precise timing and absolute commitment. Your Majesty, Captain Shun said during one of their secret planning sessions, you understand that once we implement this final deception, there can be no going back. The galaxy will believe that Valoria Prime has been destroyed and that your empire has fallen completely. Emperor Vakthar, who had spent the past 15 years watching his people transform from conquerors into saviors, nodded solemnly. Captain, I've ruled an empire built on the suffering of others. I'd rather be remembered as the emperor who ended that empire than the one who continued it. The staged final battle for Valoria Prime was a masterpiece of deception. Human technology created the appearance of a massive fleet engagement in orbit around the capital world, complete with explosions, debris fields, and electromagnetic signatures that suggested desperate fighting. When the battle ended, sensor readings showed that Valoria Prime had suffered catastrophic damage from orbital bombardment, its cities in ruins, and its population apparently dead. In reality, the last million Valorians had been evacuated through temporal displacement technology that allowed human ships to extract entire populations in what appeared to be microseconds. The ruins left behind were carefully constructed holograms that would fool casual observation while discouraging close investigation. Emperor Vakthar's final transmission to the galaxy was broadcast from what appeared to be the burning ruins of his palace. To all who hear this, know that the Valerian Empire dies today, not in conquest, but in failure. We reached too far, claimed too much, and forgot that even the mightiest empire cannot stand against the judgment of the universe itself. Let our fate serve as a warning to those who would follow our path. The transmission cut off with apparent destruction, and the galaxy mourned the fall of one of its oldest and most powerful civilizations. Historians would debate for generations whether the Valorians had been destroyed by internal conflict, environmental collapse, or mysterious external forces. None would suspect the truth, that they had chosen to save themselves by choosing to save others. In the months that followed, refugee fleets from other parts of the galaxy reported strange encounters with vessels that appeared to be of unknown origin. These ships would appear without warning to assist with natural disasters, provide medical aid during plagues, or offer technological assistance to struggling colonies. They never identified themselves and vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. The galaxy began to whisper about ghost ships, crewed by beings who helped anyone in need, but never asked for payment or recognition. Some claimed these mysterious benefactors were humans. Others believed they were members of species thought extinct. A few wild theories suggested they might be Valorians who had somehow survived their empire's collapse. The truth, known only to the members of the human coalition, was that these rescue fleets were crewed by volunteers from all the species that had chosen preservation over conquest. Former Valorian military commanders worked alongside ex-Krillian warriors and reformed Nethrani fighters, all united in their commitment to protecting life rather than destroying it. Zektar, now commanding one of these ghost fleets, stood on the bridge of a ship that bore no identifying markings as they responded to a distress call from a small research station that had been caught in an ion storm. His crew included beings from 8 different species, working together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old system of competing empires. "Sir," his science officer reported, "we've successfully stabilized the station's power grid. Medical teams are treating the injured. We should be able to complete evacuation of the critical cases within the hour." "And the station itself?" "Reparable, sir. The storm damaged their infrastructure but didn't destroy their research. They'll be able to continue their work once we complete the repairs." As Zektar watched his diverse crew save the lives of beings they had never met and would never see again, he reflected on the choices people had made. They had given up an empire built on conquest and gained a purpose built on compassion. They had abandoned the glory of victory and found something better, the satisfaction of knowing that because they existed, others would survive and thrive. The Valorian Empire was dead, but the Valorian people lived. They had learned the greatest lesson any species could master, that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the courage to preserve. And, in learning that lesson, they had finally become worthy of the strength they had always claimed to possess. In the depths of space, the ghost fleets continued their work, crewed by the children of 100 supposedly extinct civilizations, all united in the mission that the humans had taught them, to ensure that no species would ever truly become extinct as long as someone was willing to help them survive. The galaxy would never know their names, but it would be a better place because they had chosen to disappear.